I'm Vinny Politan. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. And here at Court TV, we cover a lot of murder trials. And there's always that one day in the murder trial that is extremely difficult. It's difficult for the family. It's difficult for the jurors. It's difficult for anyone inside that courtroom. And that's the day when everything is made so real, right? There's arguments. They talk about this piece of evidence, that piece of evidence, motive, phone records, whatever. But then you get to the day where there are photos displayed and there is detailed testimony about the victim and what happened to the victim. Well, today was that day in the Erica Stefanko murder trial. Ashley Biggs, the victim in this case. The medical examiner testified. There was testimony regarding the crime scene and what happened to Ashley Biggs. It was a difficult day all around. It's tough stuff, but it's so important, incredibly important. You have to put that evidence in, and you have to make it real for the jury. They have to realize that this isn't some hypothetical situation. This was someone's life who was taken. And Ashley Biggs is a real person who was a mom, who had awful, awful things done to her. She died an awful death. And today inside the courtroom, that's what the jury heard. Let's take a listen to some of the testimony from the medical examiner.
Can you just give us an overview of what you did in that process? And I think you kind of gave us a little bit before of how you processed Ashley's body. And then when we get to any significant findings, I think you prepared a PowerPoint. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
All right. So just kind of give us the basics, and then we'll move from that to the PowerPoint, and I'll switch over on the computer. Is that fair?
Yes, sir.
All right. If you could do that for us, please.
So when we received the remains of Ashley Biggs, we first examined her as she was received and photographed her body at that time and started making notations of what we saw. Significant findings that we had included the fact that she had a zip tie around her neck and she had multiple injuries to her face and head, as well as other minor injuries, more minor injuries on her extremities. So we photographed her. We then collected any evidence that we felt that would be needed for this case and began to examine her after we removed the clothing again and further documented the injuries that we had. We obtained fluid samples for drug testing, and then we began the internal examination to look at the injuries and other findings inside of the body.
Now, you had mentioned post-mortem restraints. The restraint that was around her neck, can you distinguish that from these?
Yes, sir. The restraint around the neck was applied while she was alive. We have evidence of the bleeding deep into the neck, and we have what would be called a vital reaction with all the petechia around her face, and the abrasions show changes that say that she was alive at the time that was applied, whereas these are very pale. There's no redness or anything there to suggest that they were on when she was alive.
Is that something you would see frequently in the 3,500 plus autopsies you have performed, that somebody would apply restraints after the person was dead?
We do not see that frequently. I would assume, based upon the location of that, it's something that's used to help move the body. It's to provide a better handhold.
What is the significance of that?
There's been some deep trauma to the neck. It's not unusual with a hanging type death to see absolutely no bruising inside of the neck. But with a ligature strangulation, it's more likely to see bruising deeper into the muscle due to the pressures being applied to the neck.
And in order to get bruising in this part of the neck, would it have to be a significant amount of force?
Yes, there would need to be a significant force applied to make bruising.
In regards to your autopsy and with your professional training and experience, were you able to determine which of the findings that you obtained during your autopsy would have been inconsistent with life?
Yes, sir.
Which of those would be inconsistent with life?
The ligature around her neck would be a lethal injury.
All right. And with all the bruising and injuries, broken nose, the significance of those, even though they seem to be significant, would not be necessarily inconsistent with life or life-threatening?
Those injuries are not necessarily life-threatening. They do indicate that there has been multiple blows to that individual about their head, but I can't go on to say exactly what effect that would have on her.
Think about it. As you hear that testimony, right? This doctor's done 3,500 autopsies, right? So she's very experienced and she knows what she's doing. She's a professional. But for a family member, you're hearing all this stuff and you're trying to imagine what happened. What happened to Ashley Biggs? What a terrible way to die. And if you're being, choked like that and strangled like that, you know that things are about to end. And you can imagine what's racing through her mind at that time, probably thinking about her child. Let's bring in Chanley Painter, Court TV legal correspondent who was in the courtroom all day, joining us tonight live outside the courthouse in Akron, Ohio. Chanley, I know things are a lot different in this trial because of the COVID restrictions and who can be there, who can't be there. Were there any family members for the victim in court today?
Vinny, there were not, and most of them actually live out of state now, and because of the COVID restrictions, they are not here in person, but I can tell you that they are watching. I've been in touch with Ashley Biggs' close friends, her mother, along the way throughout the trial. They are keeping up with it, and based on what I had to witness, what the jury had to witness in court today, I'm glad that her family members were not in there to see the state of Ashley Biggs, what she suffered in those last moments. She died a brutal death, and it was tough for all of us in the courtroom to go through the crime scene photos, to listen to the medical examiner, to examine those photos. And I noticed most of the jurors were able to look at the photos, but most would look away really quickly. They wouldn't dwell on any of the photos. At times I would notice some jurors shake their head kind of in disbelief of what they were seeing. But it was a tough day in there, Vinny.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just the medical examiner who was testifying about what happened to Ashley Biggs. You also had Stephen Browning, the Wayne County Sheriff. Let's take a listen.
As I got closer, the driver's side window was down. Looking through the window between the front and back seat, I could see what appeared to be skin between those two seats. I then reapproached, coming up from the side of the window, the passenger side, rear window. Upon looking in, I observed an individual in there.
Can you describe for the jury what you saw?
The individual's face was very dark purple. I can still picture that. There were taser wires coming off of the individual. She had on a Domino's shirt, tan shorts, a leather belt, white tennis shoes. There were zip ties around her hands or wrists and what appeared to be zip tie around her neck.
Chanley, you did mention that Ashley Biggs' family can't travel to court, so they're watching from home. Erica Stefanko is inside that courtroom, so she is seeing and hearing everything. What sort of reactions did you notice from her today?
Well, during that exact moment of Deputy Browning, when he described what he witnessed on June 21st, 2012 at Ashley Biggs' vehicle, the prosecutor quickly put up a photo of what he was talking about, the body of Ashley Biggs. And in that moment, she reacted. She put her head down, she shook her head, covered her eyes for a moment. And the jurors were pretty stoic. She was the one showing the emotion at that point. So later on, when the medical examiner was on the stand in the afternoon, Vinny, she must have been told, she didn't even look in the direction of the screen. She didn't look at any of the photos that the medical examiner was talking about throughout that time to prevent any reaction from her.
It's the reality of what happened. Now, is it clear or is it unclear? Is it disputed that she was there at some point?
For Erica Stefanko there at
the
crime scene?
At the crime. Is there any, because again, the facts here are very gray because of Chad Cobb, her ex-husband, and his testimony about who's where. But is there any allegation that she admits being there? Or is there any evidence that makes it clear that she was there?
Well, you're correct. The main piece of evidence that puts her there at the scene, her ex-husband, Chad Cobb, says she was there at the crime scene. She called and placed the pizza order there at that abandoned or the closed business there where Ashley Biggs delivered the pizza. According to Chad Cobb, she returned to that location to pick him up with Ashley's body on the ground. She followed Cobb's and Biggs' car to where he left the car in the cornfield and walked back to Stefanko, who gave him a ride home. So according to Cobb, she is a part of this journey that night, a part at these scenes. If you listen to the testimony of Mary Brinkman, she says that Stefanko did tell her that, yes, she did drop Cobb off and pick him up at the location where Ashley Biggs delivered the pizza, and that they went to his grandparents' house. She talks about the cornfield. So the testimony putting her there comes from Cobb and his friends and family. As far as physical evidence putting her there, out of all we heard today from the investigators, the crime scene technicians, nothing specifically said, here's Erica Stefanko's DNA on this particular item, or this is connecting her here or there. In fact, her defense attorney tried very hard on cross-examination to distance her from any of the evidence introduced today, saying, well, did you see a female at this location? Or is this female clothing? These camo pants are for a man 6 foot tall, right? So he tried hard to distance and point out the fact that nothing specifically physically connects her to any of the crime scenes.
And one of the reasons I'm so curious about that is her reaction today. And I'm wondering, what was her alleged contact there to the point where maybe she never saw Ashley Biggs after she had been killed? And this may be the first time.
It is very possible.
Now, something else I want to get to, and this was, again, going back to Chad Cobb, because yesterday I recall his testimony was that this murder that he admitted to, this murder that he pleaded guilty to, he said was not planned. But let me put up on the screen, there was a backpack with some items in it, like a duct tape roll, a piece of duct tape, a Phaser cartridge, camouflage face paint, black gloves, a face mask. I mean, come on. This is like a checklist if you're going to commit the type of murder that was committed here.
And these items found at the Stefanko Cobb home the day after they were arrested, that same day actually they were arrested, they executed a search warrant. They go to the backyard, Vinny, and they find this backpack full of these items at the scene there in the backyard. And next to a lot of these items, there's other evidence that he or you would have used and found, and indeed were found at the crime scene with Ashley Biggs' body or in her vehicle. There was a Cobb Cable Company t-shirt with possible blood stains. There were muddy camo boots with stains. There were muddy camo pants. There was a knife that we saw pictures of today, as well as a taser, the parts of the taser, camo gloves, and of course those zip ties right there found next to the backpack in the backyard of the Cobb Stefanko home, and looking a lot like the same zip ties found on Ashley Biggs' body. I think the main piece of evidence though today, Vinny, was that duct tape, because they actually brought in an expert to end the day to show to the jury that the pieces of duct tape found in the backyard, on certain items that Cobb was allegedly wearing, and in the car with Ashley Biggs and on Ashley Biggs' body, all came from the same roll of duct tape right there that was found in that backpack.
So this is a great evidence. I think it implicates Chad Cobb very well. And then the question is making that link to Erica Stefanko, who, it's not going to be easy. Every case is tough. This one's a little bit, I think, more difficult because of Chad Cobb's testimony yesterday, which was in the gray area. So overall, where are we in this case for prosecutors? Are they close to wrapping this thing up?
They are very close, Vinny. In fact, the judge telling the jury today that the defense case could start tomorrow afternoon. They could be hearing closings on Monday. So for tomorrow, we're expecting the prosecutor to call one, possibly two witnesses, including the lead detective on the case. We keep hearing about Detective Hitchings will take the witness stand, and possibly someone from Verizon to the cell phone records that are important. Again, she's supposed to be the one that made that call to Domino's that night. And the defense says he will have one witness ready in the afternoon to testify for the defense. And no word yet if that's Erica Stefanko.